into this place that I had promised to the Israelites. There was certainty. Joshua's role was not to create this change. Joshua's role was to be obedient, to move forward. Joshua had to allow God's truth to shape his perception. God had made promises to that man. God had made promises to that nation. Joshua had to change the way that he looked at that situation. It wasn't up to Joshua to make those changes. It wasn't up to Joshua to be a mighty soldier or a cunning warrior or a dynamic leader. It was up to Joshua to be strong and courageous, knowing that God had already secured the victory. It wasn't up to Joshua. He needed to realize the truth of the situation. God was going to accomplish what he had set out to accomplish.
You know, I love
Christmas. When I was a kid, anybody out there when you were a child, you had to put out cookies and milk for Santa Claus? And you knew that Santa was going to be extremely upset with you if you didn't have like a tall glass of milk and a couple of sugar cookies. I remember though, growing up, we'd have Christmas Eve services, there'd be things to do, we had responsibilities, my parents would be busy. And there were Christmases where we didn't have cookies for Santa. And that terrified me. Because if Santa's not full, Santa's not happy. And if Santa doesn't have his cookies and his milk, in my mind, Santa's not going to leave me any gifts. Santa's not going to give me Tinker Toys if I don't have a sugar cookie there for him. But the problem with that was I was looking at the situation as if things were up to me leaving out those cookies. Securing those presents, getting those presents, in my mind, was dependent on my putting out those cookies. When in actuality, my parents had already purchased those presents. It wasn't up to me to ensure that those presents came. That was going to happen. God had promised things to the nation of Israel. God's purposes were going to be accomplished. God wasn't telling him, God wasn't speaking to Joshua saying that you must be the one to be the catalyst for change here. He was telling him, I'm going to accomplish these things. Your job is to be strong and courageous. We as believers must know and hold to the promises that God has given to us. You don't have to create the promises. You don't have to fulfill the promises that God has given to you. God has promised to you that he's never going to leave you or forsake you. God has promised to you through Jesus Christ that there is eternal life. God has made promises to you that he's going to keep you, that he will provide for you. God has made promises to you. It is not up to you to fulfill the promises that God has made. When I'm called on to have courage, I need to understand the reality. I need to understand that even my value as a person is not made or established by what I can do for God. I need to understand that he has promised me that I'm valuable enough to him as an individual that he sent his son Jesus Christ to die for me in the midst of my sin. God's fulfillment of his promises to me are not dependent on how great I am or what I can accomplish. I need to allow God's truth to change my perception of a situation. Joshua didn't have to win the day. Joshua had to recognize that God had made a promise to him, and Joshua had to allow that to change his perception of the situation. Okay, so I know that if I'm going to have courage when I face trials, I know that if I'm going to be courageous and be strong as a Christian man, as a Christian woman, that I have to understand God's truth and allow it to shape my perception. But it can't stop there. I have to allow that perception of God being in control, that perception of God making promises and his ability to fulfill his promises, to spur me to action. Take a look at verses 10 and 11. It says this, "And Joshua commanded the officers of the people, pass through the midst of the camp, and command the people, prepare your provisions. For within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan, to go in to take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess." God had told Joshua, "I'm giving you this land, and you are going to lead these people into it." He told him 3 times, "Be strong and courageous." So this man who had to be told to be strong, this man who had to be told to be courageous, he now stands in front of the leadership of Israel, and he says, "Prepare yourselves, because we're taking this land. So gather your provisions, because we are marching into our promise." He speaks with conviction. He speaks with courage, and he speaks with strength. It's not enough to know that God is in control. It is not enough to know that God has made promises to you. It is not enough to view the situation correctly and understand that God is in control. Those things are not enough. We must act in our faith. That correct perception must push us toward action. I love the Olympics. As you can tell, I work out all the time. I'm actually a gymnast. But what I enjoy most is the backstories, hearing about how hard they train, but how many years these athletes put into developing their skills, to honing their skills, to growing stronger and faster and better. To hear about the early mornings, the work that's put in. These athletes are preparing, they're taking action, and it's demonstrated on the grandest stage in the Olympics. It's demonstrated in the pool. It's demonstrated on the soccer field. It's demonstrated in the gymnasium. We see this action. Now imagine if their training was not physical. Imagine if their training was not in a gym. Imagine if their training was only a mental exercise. Imagine just a trainer telling an athlete, "You're capable, you're strong, it'll work out, it's going to be great." Imagine even if the training went beyond that. And they understood, well, you know what, I do have the skills to do it, and that it is possible to compete in the Olympics, it is possible to be a great athlete. Imagine if it went even further, and they even maybe watched videotapes of great athletes who had gone before and who had done fantastic things and great defeats. Imagine if that was the training. They would do horrible. These athletes would fail because there's no action. A correct perception, even a knowledge of how muscles are to work